everything out, and then just for some reason when I actually clicked on the stream I couldn't see anything coming through there at all, but it looks like I'm actually getting the audio stream now, so I'm just going to quickly get my screen share set up a little bit for later. I will eventually get my head figured out around all of this live stream stuff, and you should have a little bit more reliable stuff in the future. I'm actually on a new webcam tonight, so I'm not even messing about with either of my phones. Finally, I actually have a real streaming cam going. So hopefully you got a little bit better picture, and maybe even a little bit better audio. Again, I'm keeping an eye on the chat down here if anybody does have any questions or anything they'd like to say. Right, so yeah, today we are going to be covering natural law. We're going to be covering the Hermetic principles and the operations of alchemy. And I think this is a very important topic for us to start to cover at this time of year. We're just coming out of winter, and that's a time of death and rebirth. That is actually represented by the operation of fermentation in the alchemical tradition, which we'll go into a little bit more details with in a little while. I do have the Kybalion up on my screen share, so I'll have a little bit something to look at besides just myself when I'm talking about this. So again, just going to check that the audio is actually coming through now onto... It's actually represented. Yeah, there we are. Right, finally. Okay, so I do actually have audio. Cool. Let's get on with it. So the reason I want to talk to you about Hermeticism and alchemy specifically today is particularly with the nonsense. I'm sure a lot of you have just come off the back of Bojo's latest announcement. Apparently we're going into full lockdown. Obviously didn't actually watch it myself. I was too busy trying to get prepared for the stream, and I knew it was going to be absolute nonsense. Anyway, I do actually have a video lined up in the very, very near future where I'm going to give my opinion on the current wave of nonsense that we're dealing with at the moment. I've been looking into ONS statistics and various other things. But the importance of recognizing natural law is that gives you a lot of the basic guiding principles upon which you can then discover details of greater information, and also whereby you can then start to divine solutions to the problems, because there's always a solution applied in alchemy, and alchemy is nothing but the application of those Hermetic principles of universal natural law to allow us to enact our will upon the world, and this is our collective will. The issue we have at the moment is that most of us actually aren't even engaging with our collective will. We are following the will of others. We have given away that power to transmute the world, and we need to take that back if we're going to bring us into a place where things are more to our liking, things that the world will people in the world will conduct themselves in a way that we see fit. But again, we first have to enact that will, and if we want to enact that will, we've got to first recognize what we've got. We've got to realize that this is a gradual process of transmutation, of purification, and we can't jump straight from where we are now to where we want to be. It doesn't work like that. That's not how the physics of the universe work. That's not how natural law works. There's a process of change. There's a process of transmutation. And those of us who do want to actually change the world have got to remember we can't just jump straight to this miracle society with no money where everybody just knows what's going on. What we've got here is we've got generations and generations of manipulation and damage throughout the whole world. You know, we've been damaged by our education, we've been poisoned by our food and by medications, and emotional abuse that we didn't even realize that we've suffered over our lives, just because of the way the world has forced families to exist and the way mainstream society has trained us to function. And anybody who claims that they don't have any wounds and they don't have any damage that needs working on, they really don't recognize the whole process of transmutation, and that we're reaching for a goal. That doesn't necessarily mean we're ever going to hit 100% exactly where we want to be, but we've got to be working towards that and recognizing that there's always room for growth, and there's always room for further healing, and there's always room for having a greater love for the universe and a greater passion for what it is that you do. That is a key to starting to sort of move yourself forward. Grab a drink. So let's head over to talk a little bit about Hermeticism. I'll just share this screen with you now. Let's get this set up so you can see me and you can see it. There we are. Okay, cool. So this is from sacredtexts.com, sacred-texts.com. And I absolutely love this site. It's got loads and loads of different texts from various different world religions and anything imagine. We've got everything on here from alchemy, astrology, books on Atlantis, Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Hinduism, I Ching, Islam. Shakespeare is in there, shamanism, Shinto, Taoism, tarot, UFOs, utopia. Lots and lots of really, really interesting stuff on here. Well worth a dig through because it is all just there, available on the site. So I've done a lot of my reading around a lot of the ancient sacred texts. And when it comes to sacred texts, the Kybalion really is like it's the keystone. And I'm just going to read you a little bit from the introduction. I'll just click on that and have a look. No, it wasn't the introduction, was it? It was the Hermetic philosophy. The lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding. It's from the Kybalion. From old Egypt come the fundamental esoteric and occult teachings, which have so strongly influenced the philosophies of all races, nations, and peoples for several thousand years. Egypt, the home of the pyramids, the Sphinx, was the birthplace of the hidden wisdom and the mystic teachings. From a secret doctrine all nations have borrowed. India, Persia, Chaldea, Media, China, Japan, Assyria, ancient Greece and Rome, and other ancient countries partook liberally at the feast of knowledge. So this is basically giving you the background to Hermetic philosophy. It was the base upon which many other sacred texts were built, and many other religions find many other philosophies find their roots, so to speak. And it comes from ancient Egypt. Again, I'm not going to read this whole thing because I could be here for hours just reading through this, and I want to give you a little bit of my own personal understanding of this. There's another thing a little bit further down here that I did find quite interesting. But what it basically states here is that the man who is supposed to have written these texts, a guy called Hermes Trismegistus, deified as Hermes and Mercury and Thoth and many, many other entities throughout time. I believe he's been reinterpreted and reimagined in the lives of the Buddha and reimagined in the lives of the Christ. They are, again, the same energy being channeled by these various living beings, all tapping into the same essence of sort of unity consciousness and trying to bring that into the world in a manner that can be understood by man in his limited capacity. Because the ultimate truth is ultimately unknowable except from the mind of God, right? But what it basically says is this was designed to seed the world with this ancient knowledge and allow from that different interpretations to grow, to allow us to slowly assimilate this ancient knowledge into our societies over time. And as much as a lot of the Western religions, particularly, I can't speak too much for Eastern religions, having not really studied them, but for most Western Abrahamic religions, there's definitely an element of manipulation that's been going on there, and a bastardization of that sort of ancient knowledge and that really core understanding about the way the universe works. It is still there. The seeds of it is still there. And you can, as you read through these documents and you start to understand the information that's contained therein, you can start to see the connections between this ancient framework and the modern religions. So I was brought up as a Christian, and I'm going to just recite a passage from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. This is one of the documents. Again, you can find it on sacredtext.com. It's a very, very dense tablet, supposedly carved on a material which defies science and carved into a molecular level. Again, I'm only speculating here based on what I've been told. I've never actually held the Emerald tablets in my hands and seen the scientific studies that have been made thereof, but apparently the material upon which it is carved it defies scientific explanations, resistant to acid and all sorts of forms of erosion and attempts to cut or damage or chip or break it. Anyway, it's been interpreted many, many times over the years and translated by many, many different people, and you can see all the various translations from it here. However, the one which I am aware of is this one. This is the one that I have hopefully memorized off by heart. I used to know it off by heart, and I've been repeating this to myself for the last 2 years or so, having not truly really understood a lot of the depth of it when I first memorized it. However, I find that information like this does take time to germinate, very much like a seed when it's planted, and it's worth reciting these and holding the ideas in your mind, even line by line, and sort of considering how they feel to you and what you can sort of start to extrapolate from the information that's contained within it. I'm just going to read it to you now. Well, I'm going to try and do it off the top of my head, as I used to do it. And I want you just to think about where you might have heard these ideas before, because I know where I immediately thought of and where I still think of now a connection to Christianity via just the reciting of this passage from the Emerald Tablet. And it says, "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of one only thing. And as all things have been and arose from one, by the meditation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried in its belly, the earth its nurse. The father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force or power is entire if it be converted into earth. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth, and it receives the force of things superior and inferior. Ascends to the earth and receives the force of things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. So was the world created. From this are and do come admirable adaptations, whereof the means or process is here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." I have to try and remember that now in the future. So just having to think for yourselves about where that sort of information takes you to, and giving you a little bit of reflection internally from myself, is as I have read this in the past and I've recited it, I was immediately drawn to the idea of the Lord's Prayer, which was something that I learned as a child, being brought up by my mother, who was a Christian. There's a lot of lines in that which I think almost have a direct correspondence to this translation from the Emerald Tablet. That which is below is like that which is above, on earth as it is in heaven. Yeah, you've got that. And again, it ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again descends to the earth. Earth and heaven references there. There's loads of others in there, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. I just want it to be something that you take some time to think on and see what information comes to you from understanding and reciting and meditating upon that passage, This has been one of the biggest things for me. Let's get it back up for you again. This has been one of the biggest things for me in terms of my inner standing and understanding and overstanding of Hermeticism and alchemy. I'm just going to close that down, and we're going to have a quick look at the 7 Hermetic principles. This is the second most important thing that you can start to study about Hermetics, because these 7 principles right here are the basis upon which the entire universe is built. And these stand even higher than the scientific laws which have been recognized by man. These are no less scientific than, motion or gravity or anything else. In fact, motion, got cause and effect right there. Laws of motion. Action and reaction, cause and effect. And all scientific laws are derived from these base Hermetic laws. And these Hermetic laws apply on all planes of existence. And by planes, I'm not even talking in this really fluffy, etheric, intangible sense. I'm talking about real, tangible, reasonable planes. They exist on your emotional plane. The emotional level of your existence. They exist on the mental plane of existence. They exist in the physical domain as well. These 7 principles can be found everywhere, and the more you become aware of them, the more you are again able to divine that natural law, and you're able to witness it and observe it as it appears, and from then you can start to acquire greater knowledge. So what are the 7 Hermetic principles? Well, they're listed right here. You've got the principle of mentalism, the principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. And these 7 principles will be discussed and explained as we proceed with these lessons. I have read through one of these. I think it was the mentalism one. I think it was the mentalism one in my previous stream. However, I'm just going to go through it again one more time. And I want you just to have a little think about the words I'm saying right now. So the principle of mentalism, and this is the most important one, mentalism. Because mentalism is the keystone from which everything else is derived. And mentalism is the most fundamental principle, but the hardest one to fully actualize and fully integrate into your being. Because it goes so far against most of what we've been taught about the way the world is, that it's something that is inflicted upon us, not something that is generated by us. We'll talk about that. So the all is mind, the universe is mental. This principle embodies the truth that all is mind. It explains the all, which is the substantial reality underlying all the outward manifestations and appearances which we know under the terms of the mental universe, the phenomena of life, matter, energy, and in short, all that is apparent to our material senses. So absolutely everything that could possibly exist, there is nothing that can exist outside it, is spirit, which in itself is unknowable, undefinable, which may be considered to be a universal, infinite living mind. It also explains that the phenomenal world or universe is simply a mental creation of the all. This is really, really important. Mental creation of the all. Watching and listening to Mark, I think it's Pasio or Pasio, talking about natural law today. Absolutely amazing guy, well worth checking out. Get on YouTube, Mark Pasio, Natural Law. It's a 6-hour seminar or so. I've only watched the first 2 hours of it. His presentation style is very straight to the point. He pulls absolutely no punches, and he's quite cutthroat with a lot of his explanations. So really, really, really worth reading into him and listening to some of his work. He's a very, very knowledgeable guy. And he talks about this idea of a lot of false spirituality, not false spirituality, New Age spirituality pushes this idea that the only thing that really exists is you. And this is a solipsist idea, the idea that You can't prove that anybody exists. That the only thing you can prove that exists is yourself. And that's a dangerous way of thinking, because you then start to think of yourself as God. You start to think of yourself as being superior to everybody else. And you start to think of yourself as being the absolute and only thing that is in existence. The world almost becomes like a computer game. And that's dangerous, because that takes away empathy from people. What Hermeticism teaches instead is that it's a mental creation of the all in entirety, everything that is. In a sense, you are creating the universe, but only in the sense of you being a single neuron within the mind of God, him, her, itself. It is that greater mind that is creating the universe. And yes, you are a component of that doing it. And there is personal perceptions of the universe, but perception is not always the same as truth. Truth is an aggregate of all perceptions, so to speak. The bringing together of all those perceptions from every possible angle gives you what is universal truth. It gives the absolute truth, which is undeniable. And there is such a thing as absolute truth. Don't let anybody try and convince you otherwise. There is an objective truth. So the mental creation of the all, subject to the laws of created things, and that the universe as a whole and in its parts or units has its existence in the mind of the all, in which mind we live and move and have our being. Again, you can create things in your mind, and you can create very real characters and entities within your mind, which operate on the laws of the created things within your mind. They interact with each other. Again, Tesla very famously used to do all his testing in his mind. He did all his prototyping in his mind. He built and ran machines, and the creative power of the mind is incredible. Lots of scientists have used this. Einstein imagined himself riding on a beam of light. That's a creation in the mind. So it's easier to think about ourselves as being a dream of God, so to speak. This principle, by establishing the mental nature of the universe, easily explains all of the varied and mental psychic phenomena that occupy such a large proportion of the public attention, and which, without such explanation, are non-understandable and defy scientific treatment. Once you understand that we are all fundamentally one and we are all connected, then a lot of these psychic phenomena, a lot of these paranormal ideas cease to seem so paranormal anymore, because there's a scientific explanation. The base perception of us all being fundamentally and intimately connected to all of creation allows things like telepathy to be very easily explainable. Well, we're all linked to the same greater source mind. We're all part of this great tapestry, so that information is available to both of us. So the idea of you transmitting it to me is, really not that wild. Again, the same idea with remote viewing. If we're all ultimately connected to everything, then you could project yourself to any place in the whole tapestry of the universe and view what was going on there. All these mental phenomena start to have a really solid scientific explanation. And if you don't think there is a really solid scientific explanation to this, I implore you to get on YouTube after this video, look for Nassim Haramein black hole, spelt with a W, hole as in everything, whole. And it gives you some absolutely amazing information. What is proven with the maths and with the science is that every single proton contains enough energy, enough information to describe the entire universe. There is more energy when you take into account the vacuum, the fabric of the universe itself, that exists in the space that proton's supposed to be. Now remember, this proton isn't actually the solid bit of material. It's an electromagnetic vortex which behaves and feels like something that's quite solid, but it's not really something solid. Check out Left Brain Spirituality. Start with Let There Be Light, and I'll give you all the explanation about that. I do have one more episode to come out on the subject of the ether and the electromagnetic potential in particular, but you'll find that again in some of the later episodes. But there's enough energy in that proton, in the space of that proton, to create all the universe. It's almost as if that proton is the only proton in existence, and it is simultaneously every proton that is. What's even more exciting is that when you consider all of the energy of the vacuum as part of that proton itself and use that energy converted into matter to calculate the gravity of that proton, you can now build atoms using nothing but protons. The electron cloud energy, negative charged potential existent around the atom forms as a product of these positive charges moving around very, very rapidly. And what you find is you can actually even make up the excess mass of the neutrons, because the speed that these protons are actually orbiting each other, and they are orbiting each other like a pair of suns whizzing around each other, if you imagine helium, they're orbiting so fast, damn near the speed of light, that they get so much relativistic mass that they effectively double in weight. And that's why hydrogen only has an atomic weight of 1, where helium has an atomic weight of 4, because those two protons are whizzing around each other near the speed of light. They're moving so fast that their mass increases to near double what it was previously, and therefore you've got that extra mass which we've always presumed as neutrons. And now we've got an atomic scale structure which is very, very similar to what we see at the cosmic scale. And this brings us down here now to this principle of correspondence, as above, so below. And I really think that Nassim Haramein was tapping into this ancient wisdom here when he came up with the idea. He looked at the way that the macrocosm worked, and he looked at the way that the microcosm was described to work, and they're not reflections, they're not the same. That same pattern should be repeatable on multiple levels. Otherwise, it's not universal law. So let's talk about the principle of correspondence. As above, so below, and as below, so above. The principle of correspondence embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of being and life. The old Hermetic axiom ran in these words: as above, so below, as below, so above. And the grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox and hidden secrets of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much that would be otherwise be unknowable to us. This principle is of universal application, like all of these principles, and manifestation on the various planes of the material, mental, and spiritual universe. You can see correspondence. As within, so without is another. The world that you hold within your body is the world that you perceive outside of your body. You're looking at the world through the lens of your biases. So that correspondence of your bias is then reflected in the world because of the way that information is colored by your perceptions. It is a universal law. The ancient Hermeticists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments. It's a tool, guys. This principle is not just something that is inflicted upon you. This is a tool, very much like mentalism. When you understand that anything that is created has to have existed in the mind of a conscious entity, it has to have existed in the mind of consciousness first, before it's brought into being in the physical world, then that's a really, really important tool. Speaking of tools, for tools to have existed, a conscious being had to look at something and see that it could be repurposed for another use, or that it could be combined with something else, or used in a way that nature hadn't intended it, at least in the way it was brought into being as a rock or a brick or a stick or a whatever else. Someone had to imagine that that could be repurposed. And from that imagination of the repurposing of those items, those materials, we got the idea of tools. So it had to exist in the mind first before it could exist in the physical. Therefore, we must have existed in the mind of God before we existed in the mind of the physical, in the mind of the creator, in the mind of the all, whatever word you want to use. And the idea of mind gives us the principle of correspondence, because to have mind, there must be an opposite. Mind, matter, black, white, light, dark, open, shut. They're all pairs. They're all opposites. Self implies other, and life implies death. Correspondence. You've always got to have those opposite planes. And there has to be a meeting between them. They have to be reflections. Otherwise, they're not truly opposite. It's used even to aside the veil of Isis, to the extent that a glimpse of the face of the goddess might be caught. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enables man to measure distant suns and their movements while seated in his observatory, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. Studying the monad, he understands the archangel. Important tool for divining all the all the future knowledge that we're going to come into. You'll notice that all these principles link. And while you can actually work in one direction down the chain, you can start from mentalism and get down to gender. You can also start at gender and work your way back up to mentalism. It works in both directions. The reasoning and the logic goes up and down the chain. It goes front and back. It travels in both directions. So when you've got correspondence, when you've got two planes, you've got an above and a below, or an in and an out, then there's a sense of vibration that's moving from one to the other, right? There's a scale we're starting to get the idea of. Vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, and everything vibrates, the Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in motion. Everything vibrates, nothing is at rest. Facts which modern science endorses and which new scientific discovery tends to verify. And yet this Hermetic principle was enunciated thousands of years ago by the masters of ancient Egypt. Still coming through on the sound? Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So we're up here on vibration. Okay. So this principle explains that the differences between different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from varying rates of vibration. The lower your vibration, the closer to matter it is. The higher the vibration, the closer to spirit it is. And that doesn't necessarily make lower lesser. They are just as important, and this is again a really, really important idea to get across. Don't get lost in the idea that the mental is all that matters, because the mental would not exist without the physical, and the physical would not exist without the mental. They are intertwined, and they are both as fundamentally important as each other. From the all, which is pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter, all is in vibration. The higher the vibration, the higher the position in the scale. The vibration of spirit is at such an infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest, just as a rapid moving wheel seems to be motionless. And this is, again, that's a very, very, very interesting that particular wording, like the rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless. When I'm talking about matter being this vibration of space itself, this oscillation, this vortex created in the fabric of space itself, the reason that it appears to us to be this solid material thing is because of our frame rate, our ability to sample the universe. We are unable to actually see the moments when it doesn't exist, at least not reliably. And that's why science has got this idea of matter being quite fuzzy, that it kind of seems to exist when you look at it and kind of doesn't when you don't. And that's because it isn't really this solid thing. It only appears solid by the way we measure it and our limited ability to perceive the very, very small changes that are happening. If it vibrates fast enough, you don't hear each of the individual oscillations. You hear a steady tone. So as frequencies get lower, you'd be able to hear each individual oscillation, like like on a drum. That's technically an oscillation. You've got oscillations of sound and no sound, sound and no sound, up and down this scale. If you take that vibration very faster and faster, eventually it starts to sound like a clean, clear, pitched tone. And that is, again, it's this vibration up and down. But the higher that tone gets, the less easy it is to discern each individual wave, each individual wobble. And that's why the matter of the universe appears to be solid, because it's vibrating so fast that we can't see when it's off, so to speak. It's flicking on and off so fast, this pulsating. But because it's pulsating like a strobe light, if you turn the strobe up fast enough, it looks like constant, like a constant light, like it's not flicking on and off. Fluorescent bulbs. If you ever point a camera at a fluorescent bulb, if the frame rate's not high enough, you'll actually see a flickering, because it can detect that on and off state where your eyes might not. If the frame rate's high enough. At the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so low as to seem at rest. Between these poles, there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. From corpuscle to electron, atom and molecule to worlds and universes, everything is in vibratory motion. That's an oscillation between two poles. That could be between existing and not existing, in terms of the life of the universe, from not existing to fully inexistent, and at its most complex to not existing again. That is one full oscillation, and that single oscillation might take quadrillions, pentillions, septillions, octillions, who knows, nonillions of years. And again, that cycle might again repeat. Not exist, exist, not exist, exist. Long vibrations, so slow that it seems to be almost permanent, the state that we're in. Whereas again, some vibrate so fast as to be almost, again, the other scale doesn't even seem to be moving anymore, it's moving so fast. So things can oscillate so slowly as to be imperceptible as a vibration, and they can also at the same time oscillate so fast as to be imperceptible as a vibration. And it's important to remember this when we're considering things as being physical and hard and solid. It's also true that planes of energy and force, which are but varying degrees of vibration, and also on the mental planes whose states depend on vibrations, again, your brain waves are an oscillation, and even on the spiritual planes, an understanding of this principle with the appropriate formulas enables Hermetic students to control their own mental vibrations as well as those of others. The masters also apply this principle to the conquering of natural phenomena in various ways. He who understands the principle of vibrations grasps the scepter of power, says one of the old writers. And we're talking about control here. A lot of people probably balk at that word. Control doesn't necessarily mean to manipulate, it means to manage. There's nothing wrong with managing as long as you're not infringing upon the toes of others, and to help people manage their own mental states. If you think about it, when someone's stressed, when someone is in a place of anxiety, you help them to manage that and bring themselves down from that. You're helping them to control their emotional state. You're not enforcing your will upon them. So vibration, again, implies a polarity. If you're going to vibrate, you've got to be vibrating between two poles. So everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature. This is important, identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes will meet, all truths are but half-truths, and all paradoxes may be reconciled. Now again, you'll notice the small case, lowercase t there on truths, because we're not talking about absolute truth, we're talking about subjective truth. So all truths are but half of the truth. What is order for the spider is chaos for the fly. So you've got to see both sides of that debate there. You've got to see both sides of the pole. And I covered some of these ideas a little bit in my talk with Henna and Hoppy. I'm going to quickly read a little bit more before I get distracted. It says this principle embodies the truth that everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Everything has its pair of opposites, all of which were old Hermetic axioms. Okay? So we only understand anything as from a point of comparison to something else. If there's no point of comparison, then there's no context to it. For example, we only know light because dark exists. There are degrees of illumination. So illumination is the nature. The degrees are light and dark. Yeah? The nature is height. The degrees are tall and short. Yeah? The nature is passion. The degrees are love and hate. See? There's all sorts of ways you can consider it, but everything, you've got to remember, it's this pole, this line, and everything in that nature exists somewhere along those line, along that line between those two poles. It is usually not one extreme or another. It's normally a blend of the two. If you can imagine 100% light being 0% darkness, and 100% darkness being 0% light, 100% love being 0% hate. And hate and dislike and disgust are not necessarily negative in an absolute sense. They are negative in a subjective sense, but they can also be useful tools if you understand how to use them. And again, this is why understanding your polar nature is very important, because both sides teach you. Love teaches you what you prefer. Hate teaches you what you don't prefer. And they're both teachers. They're both fundamental lessons. And you can just bask in either one of them without really taking anything away from it. But then you're not applying your principles. You're not applying polarity. You're not applying vibration or correspondence or mentalism. It explains that in everything there are two poles or opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only the two extremes of the same thing, hot and cold, with many varying degrees between them. To illustrate heat and cold, although opposites are really the same thing, the differences consisting merely of degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There's no black and white lines here. This is a spectrum. So that's the idea of polarity, which has come from the idea of vibration, things moving between two opposite poles of potential. Extreme of one, extreme of the other, produces your vibration. So it says here, just to read a little bit more before we move on to the next one, the same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing, the differences consisting of varying degrees between the two poles. Yes, just to say that. Principle of polarity explains that these paradoxes and no other principle can supersede it. The same principle operates on the mental plane, again, not just on physical reality, on the mental plane, the spiritual planes, the emotional planes, exists on all levels. The art of polarization becomes a phase of mental alchemy, known and practiced by ancient and modern Hermetic masters, and understanding the principle will enable one to change his own polarity as well as that of others, if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. So what does that mean, mastering the art of neutralizing opposite poles? Well, where there is hate, you must inject love, and where there is darkness, you must inject light, and where there is truth, where there are lies, you must inject truth. The opposite pole is always the remedy, and we see this again in the real world. Positive and negative electromagnetic charges will neutralize each other and even out. Acids and alkalis will neutralize each other and even out. The universe always tries to find this point of balance. It's always trying to get back to that point of mutuality, of neutrality. Principle of rhythm, and again, this comes out of the idea of polarity and vibration. If you've got a vibration between two poles, then that generates a rhythm. On, off, dum, 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 dum. That rhythm is a function of the vibration between two poles. Everything flows in and out. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left, and rhythm compensates. So again, you always see this idea of balance and swing, left to right. This idea of rhythm can be seen in Isaac Newton's laws of motion. Action in one direction causes an equal and opposite reaction in the opposite direction. That's an idea of rhythm. This flow in and out. You see rhythms in the tides. You see rhythms in the way the seasons change, day and night. They're all in line with these universal rhythms. And some rhythms happen faster, and some rhythms happen slower. Some rhythms take a day, some rhythms take a year, some rhythms take months, some rhythms take eons. But all of these rhythms are there in nature. And again, once you understand this principle of rhythm, that this pendulum swing, this oscillation between the two poles, between the two extremes is always there, then you can start to teach yourself how to rise up the pendulum swing. So let's take our emotions. Our emotions swing from positive to negative, from wonderful, great things to really awful things. And the trick to still experiencing all of the joys of the world while mitigating the suffering of the negative swing is to teach yourself to move up the string. Because as this triangle forms the displacement of the pendulum, if you're at the bottom of the pendulum, you experience this massive motion away from the normal, from extreme happiness to extreme sadness, to extreme happiness to extreme sadness. If you can teach yourself to move up that string, then nearer the top, higher vibrations experience much lower displacement from the norm. And this is the idea of being balanced. The less displaced you get from your norm, from your natural point of being, the more balanced that you are. This principle embodies the truth that everything is manifested and measured. In everything there is manifested a measured motion, to and fro, a flow and inflow, a swing backward and forward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and low tide between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity. And again, you can see how these principles are stacking into each other. They're all inferring and back inferring each other. There's always an action and reaction. Newton's laws of gravitation, Newton's laws of motion. An advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking. Again, I'm sort of called to my study of Wicca in my youth. To rise, you must fall. Yeah, there's always that rhythm. You've got to go to from one extreme to the other. You have to experience them both because they define each other. This law is manifest in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life of all things, and finally in the mental states of man. And it's within this latter that a Hermeticist finds the understanding of the principle most important. Again, talking before, it's mental manipulation and neutralization of energies that you don't prefer. They apply the mental law of neutralization. The Hermeticists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain means to overcome its effects in themselves by the use of the appropriate formulas and methods. They apply the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle or cause it to cease its operation, but they've learned how to escape its effects upon themselves to a certain degree by depending on the mastery of the principle. These higher principles can always outweigh the lower principles. All is mind. You are the master of your perception of the universe. And as long as you bear in mind the fact that mentalism is the key to all of this, then you can use your mind to transmute the world that not only you perceive, but over time and through the application of collective will, actually impact the material universe. But it starts up here with the mind. They apply the mental law of neutralization. Yes, I've got to that. They've learned to use it instead of being used by it, not being carried by the momentum of that pendulum, choosing to climb up to that spring, climb up the string and experience a lesser oscillation towards the top when they take themselves into higher states of consciousness. In this and similar methods consists the art of the Hermeticists. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point which he desires to rest and then neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum, which would tend to carry him to the other pole. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery do this to a certain degree, more or less unconsciously, but the master does this consciously, and by the use of his will, enacting his will, or her will, and attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on the part of the masses, who are swung backward and forward like a pendulum. This principle and that of polarity have been closely studied by the Hermeticists, and the methods of counteracting, neutralizing, and using them form an important part of Hermetic mental alchemy. And this is where we'll get into the operations of alchemy and the operations of transmutation a little bit later. Last two, and then we're very, very quickly going to rock through the principles of transmutation. We'll cover them in a little bit more detail next week, I think, in the following live stream, if I can actually get my audio to work. Thankfully, it's still here for now. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many plays of causation, but nothing escapes the law. This principle embodies the fact that there is a cause for every effect and an effect from every cause. It explains that everything happens according to law and that nothing ever merely happens. Nothing just is. It is for a reason. It is according to law. Just because we do not have the wide enough perception to see all the laws in play that bring that event into manifestation does not mean it is not according to law. Nothing is random. Things only seem random because we have limited perception of the influences and the laws involved. If we could ultimately know all of the factors involved, we could make that prediction, but we don't. That there is no such thing as chance. That while there are various planes of cause and effect, the higher dominating the lower planes, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. The Hermeticists understand the art and methods of rising above the ordinary plane of cause and effect to a certain degree, and by mentally rising to a higher plane, they become causes instead of effects. Okay? And that's important to remember. They're not escaping the law. They're just placing them in a place, in a position of the cause. Things are affected or things affect things. Be the affector, not the affected. This is reaction versus action. Action is proactive. Reaction is reactive by definition. What we're talking about here is becoming proactive, not reactive, becoming the affector, not the affected. The masses of people are carried along obedient to environment, affected, the affected. The wills and desires of others stronger than themselves, hereditary, suggestion, and the outward causes moving them about like pawns on the chessboard of life. But the masters, rising to the plane above, dominate their moods, characters, qualities, and powers, as well as the environment surrounding them, and become movers instead of pawns. They help to play the game of life instead of being played and moved about by others' wills and environment. They use the principle instead of being its tools. The masters obey the causation of higher planes, but they help to rule on their own plane. In this statement, there is condensed a wealth of Hermetic knowledge. Let him read who can. So understanding that everything is a cause and effect means that you have two choices. You can either be the one who is affected or you can be the one who is affecting. This is why sovereignty is so important. Because as a sovereign, you are the cause. You are the one taking responsibility. You are not being affected by other people's decisions on how you should run your life. You are the one who is having the affect. So very, very important we understand that our causes and their effects. If you are not the cause, then you are the one who is affected. And we've got to be the ones who actually play the game. That means self-organizing. That means self-realizing. That means being the ones moving the chess pieces, not the ones being moved. And that requires taking action to place you in that position of the causer, not the effectee. Principle of gender. Now, this one has been under a very serious attack in the last few years, and I think that this is, pretty much their end game. They've attacked this idea of mentalism and correspondence and vibration and polarity. All these base hermetic principles have been attacked over the years, and this gender is the latest one. There is a movement at the moment to even suggest the whole idea of gender doesn't exist, when it fundamentally does. There is a difference between masculine ideas and feminine ideas, and masculine expressions of a certain thing and feminine expression of the same thing, which is very, very different. Gender isn't everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So every single one of these poles, every single one of these vibrations, every single one of these natures has a masculine and feminine principle to it. This principle embodies the truth that there is a gender manifested in everything, the masculine and feminine principles ever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but of the mental and even the spiritual planes. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. On higher planes, it takes higher forms, but the principle is ever the same. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without this principle. You've got to have opposing forces. You've got to have opposing degrees of the same nature. An understanding of its laws will throw light on many a subject that has perplexed the minds of men. The principle of gender works ever in the direction of generation, regeneration, and creation. Everything and every person contains the two elements or principles, or this great principle within it, him or her. Every male thing, this is important here, every male thing has the female element also. Every female contains the male principle. They are both manifested differently. Women can be strong and authoritarian and decisive and resilient, all the traits which are considered traditionally masculine. This forcefulness, this enactment of the will, this action idea, those are all very masculine things. The opposite principles are the feminine ones. So creation in a random fashion is a feminine thing. Creation in a constructive and rigid fashion is a very masculine thing. Nurturing in terms of cuddling and comforting is a very feminine thing, whereas nurturing in terms of strengthening and giving courage to and encouraging independence of an entity is a very masculine interpretation of exactly the same principle. Randomness, creativity, curves, ethereal concepts, anything that's fluffy and loosely defined, this is femininity. Anything which is very rigidly defined, anything that's compartmentalized, anything that is based purely in logic and reason is a masculine principle. That's not to say that women can't embody masculine principles and men can't embody feminine principles, but that they manifest differently when channeled through. When you channel feminine energy through a male entity, you get a different result than when you channel male energy through a feminine entity, or female energy through a feminine entity. They all produce slightly different colors and slightly different outward manifestations of the same base principles. If you would understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation and regeneration, you must understand and study his Hermetic principle. It contains the solution of many mysteries of life. We caution you that this principle has no reference to the many base, pernicious and degrading lustful theories, teaching and practices which are taught under fanciful titles and which are prostitution of the great natural principle of gender. Such base revivals of the ancient infamous forms of phallicism tend to ruin body, mind and soul, and the Hermetic philosophy has ever sounded the warning notes against these degraded teachings. So you must not glorify the masculine over the feminine. They are no more important than each other. They are both fundamentally equal and opposite at the same time. Equal in nature, opposite in degrees, and necessary, both equally necessary for the full tapestry of life. These degraded teachings which tend towards lust, licentiousness, and perversion of nature's principles. If you seek such teachings, you must go elsewhere for them. Hermeticism contains nothing for you along these lines. To the pure, all things are pure. To the base, all things are base. Right, I'm just going to quickly, I couldn't actually find it on the Kybalion before, the operations of transmutation. I'm going to quickly skim over these because I do realise that the stream has been going for an awful long time. Let's put Alchemy on there as well. Let me find the link. I was looking at for 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. Yes, here we are. So these are the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. So what's the point of alchemy? Well, alchemy is the process of taking the Hermetic principles, applying them to yourself internally, and using that to turn the lead of your undeveloped, polluted, and unpurified consciousness into gold, into the stuff of commerce, the stuff of purity, the stuff of value. That's taking that lead and purifying it. And there is an actual process by which you go through. And as there are 7 principles, there are 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. And interestingly enough, you can correlate all 7 of the principles and all 7 of the operations with different days of the week, which is an important thing in alchemy, because alchemy is not just about working inwardly, it's about working outwardly in the universe, because we recognize the material world as being important as the spiritual world, and the material world being a reflection of the spiritual world. That's why a lot of rituals can be used in Hermeticism and alchemy to generate internal change. You recognize that the process that you are performing in the physical world is also a process that is being performed internally. And the result of that is that you are able to transmute your consciousness into a place where your shadows have been fully integrated and fully balanced, and you are a whole person. You are holy. You have got both sides of your personality, not only the things which society celebrates and society sees as being useful, but you've also integrated in a positive manner those sides of you which you are ashamed of. Jung would call them your shadow. And there's a lot of Jungian psychology which is tied into alchemy. Again, if you want to do more studying around this, as well as Nassim Haramein, check out Carl Jung as well. Psychoanalyst, very interesting. I believe Freud was actually either he was a student of Freud or Freud was a student of him. I can't remember which, but they are very much linked. So let's have a look at this stages of spiritual alchemy. You might have heard this before. This solve a coagula, dissolve and coagulate. And that is a description of the Hermetic process of transmutation from start to bottom. From top to bottom, you dissolve, you break up the material of your consciousness, and you discard that which is not worthy, and then you reintegrate, you recoagulate that and bring it all back in together and reintegrate yourself. And the more times you go through this process, it's like distillation. You're purifying it over and over again, getting to a gradually purer and purer state of being. Latin expression solve coagula is derived from solve, meaning to break down and separate, while coagula describes the process of bringing elements back together, coagulating into a new, higher form. Interestingly, solve coagula is a wonderful psychological metaphor. By pursuing gold or listening to our intuitive higher calling, we break down limiting parts within us that are in the way of our transformation. This is the Philosopher's Stone. And into a free and whole being, which is the coagulation. While there are no universal stages of alchemy, due to the sheer number of different schools out there, these are some of the most widely accepted stages. So there's lots of different interpretations of this, depending on which specific school you study. So calcination is the process of heating and decomposing raw matter. In other words, breaking down parts of ourselves that are in the way of our own happiness. Often we'd rather be right or fulfill an idea of perfection than be truly happy. So we continue neglecting the exploration of ourselves. The stage of calcination represents the stage in our lives whereby we begin breaking down our egos, self-doubt, stubbornness, self-sabotaging behavior, pride, and arrogance, and put it aside so we can find out what's underneath. In a practical sense, this would involve heating the material which you are intending to purify under high heat and pressure. This would have normally been done in an alchemical oven, and it was often used to develop alchemical, it's not tinctures, elixirs, that's the term. Because what you're doing when you're creating elixir, you're not only trying to harness the important chemicals of a physical living entity, but you are also trying to extract its spirit, its essence, it's that etheric component that isn't necessarily contained within the chemicals themselves. So after you've heated this via the process of calcination, you then dissolve it. This is dissolution. So once we've broken down all of our personality characteristics that were in the way, we are left with the process of dissolution, which is beginning feeling less identification with our false sense of self. Once we are free from our pride or self-doubt, we can take one step back and truly observe our positive and negative qualities. This is the application of will, application of fire. Fire is one of the elements in alchemy which represents will. It represents your drive to make things happen, to enact your desires upon the world. And that applying of that spiritual fire, that mental fire to your being allows you to burn away those bits of yourself which are impure, leaving a more pure substance behind. In this stage, our inability to take responsibility for our many faults, our avoidance of traumatizing memories, and other inattentions rise to the surface, causing us to become aware of how our behavior might be affecting others. This is the beginning of the spiritual maturity and spiritual awakening process. Sometimes the stage of transformation is brought about accidentally by illness and misfortunes in our lives that cause us to really pay attention to what we're doing, shocking us out of our avoidance patterns such as workaholism, drugs, and TV watching. So this is quite a painful process, this, particularly these first two stages where you're applying that will to burn away those things of you which are not pure, and then allowing yourself to become dissolved and lose substance. That allows the bits of you which aren't pure to sediment out. And this is separation. Separation is the stage whereby which we make our thoughts and emotions more defined by isolating them from other thoughts and emotions. A simple example is our attempt to free our heart from resentment while trying to forgive someone. So this is separating the salt, which is the stuff which dissolves, from the precipitate, which is the stuff which doesn't dissolve. And the idea being that you can then filter that solution and the hard bits which haven't dissolved back into the liquid, into the ether, the non-corporeal part, are left behind, and you've purified your essence. But again, you're still separated, you're still not reintegrated fully yet. So even though you've managed to filter out and discard some of those waste products, some of those things that are impure, the things that you don't want, you're still not fully reintegrated yet. The process of separation involves becoming aware of our authentic feelings for a person or for ourselves. And in this stage, we choose to experience our anger, frustration, or disappointment towards another or ourselves, rather than reverting back to the old habit of dutifully trying to forgive or forget because it is the right or comfortable thing to do. So again, this is recognizing those impurities, those things which we've not dealt with. Separation is closely entwined with shadow work, in that we must allow all feelings and thoughts within us to surface side by side. This helps us to isolate particular elements of our character in order to honestly see and assess them. So you might have heard me speaking a little bit about these ideas with Hoppy, and what she would often talk about is embracing all emotions, no matter how awful they are. Embracing them and letting them wash over you and not hiding away from them, but accepting them as being an emotion that you have. Yes, I'm angry at that person, and that's okay. I'm allowed to be angry because I'm a human being, and human beings have emotions. Recognizing that and embracing it and allowing it, and not judging yourself for having those emotions, just accepting it as being something which you have and something which you can hold on to, you can allow to pass. Allowing those emotions to surface and purging them from your being, or purging the negative aspects from your being, and then integrating the more positive aspects of that particular nature of yourself. Because again, any nature that you hold has a positive and a negative pole. You can reintegrate that. This helps us to isolate particular elements of our character in order to honestly see and assess them. So taking them away from yourself, allowing you to see them as an objective thing rather than a subjective thing. Conjunction. Fourth operation of alchemical transmutation. After the purification and clarification of the first three stages, we must properly combine the remaining elements within us through the process of conjunction. This is starting to make yourself whole again. While in the previous step, we separated and learned to distinguish all the separate feelings and thoughts within us, conjunction provides the inner space, the simmering, that is required for us to truly and honestly accept all the parts of our authentic self. When we experience this stage of spiritual alchemy, all our unconscious thoughts and feelings bubble up to the surface and into the light of conscious awareness. At this stage, journaling, introspection, solitude, and meditation are particularly useful. So we've gone through that point of separating all these things from ourselves and considering them as being something which is not intimately tied to us anymore, so we can decide to hold on to it or to give it away if it's not serving us anymore, and then reintegrating all of those things that are left and starting to bring them back together into a whole. Fermentation. I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream. Presumably it was still actually working at that point. Fermentation is death and rebirth. It is the stage that we are going through right now. If we're looking at the way the seasons work as being a reflection of this, as all things are, reflections of higher and lower principles on different planes, fermentation is the beginning of our process in rebirth. We've gone through this death process here. Separation, the dissolution, the breaking down of our being into its component parts. Fermentation can be compared to the death of a grape, which then becomes the birth of the wine. While the first four stages involve working with aspects of our old personality, in this stage of fermentation, we begin to experience moments of our more refined self. So this is where we're taking those base materials and bringing them together into something which is representative of a purer and higher quality self. Fermentation occurs in two parts: putrefaction and spiritization. Putrefaction is the decomposition of our former selves. If you want to grow into something new, you have to let what was existent before die. And that is a painful and harrowing process. The ego will resist that process. This is where lots and lots of people trip up. They'll go through all these processes here of calcination, the application of will to themselves, the dissolution, the breaking down of themselves, the separation of the things that they do not prefer from the things that they do prefer, and the considering of things separately. They'll even start to try and bring them back together, but when it comes to letting the old stuff die, they just can't do it. It's too painful for them. And you have to let the grape die in order for the wine to be made. To rise, you must fall. There is no generation without corruption. If you want something to grow, cover it in shit. It has to be an unpleasant process by its very nature. Decomposition of our former selves, the process of inner death by which the old elements of our conscious and unconscious minds are allowed to rot and decompose. Some call this stage the dark night of the soul, as it can be followed by troublesome mental states such as depression. This is what I was talking about with Hannah and Hoppy again when I was talking about this awakening process and this purification being really painful. It's a death. It's a really awful time. You've identified things about yourself that perhaps you didn't want to admit, perhaps you didn't want to accept were part of who you are. And this process is part of that. On the other hand, spiritization is the stage in which we begin to look at the world with a new light. With the right guidance and with solid inner work, spiritization involves letting go of all the aspects of ourselves and our lives that don't serve or contribute to our spiritual transformation. This is when we taste moments of great inner peace and stillness. If the sea was not stormy, you would not notice when it was still. Polarity, duality, vibration. Self defines other. This is the hardest process. This death of the old. Anybody who's never done a death ceremony, I seriously recommend it. It's not as morbid as it sounds. I've done it once before, and I found it very, very profound. It's certainly something that I'll be indulging you with again. But it involves a identification of that aspect of yourself which you wish to purify from your being, and we made little straw dolls out of it, and we put our intentions about the things of ourselves that we did not prefer into the straw dolls, and we burned them, and we imagined that part of ourselves being infused into this entity and being discarded and dying and allowed to come away from ourselves. And I found it quite profound, and it can be a very beautiful and quite haunting and traumatic process almost, provided you give it that real degree of attention to it, and you really give it the serious consideration that it deserves. 2 more left. We're nearly done, guys. Thank you to all of those who stuck with me. We very much appreciate you all. I haven't kept up very much with the chats. Doesn't look like many people are actually chatting too much, which is fine. It gives me more chance to just witter on, I suppose. Distillation. Again, we're coming back to this idea of purification now. So distillation, once we begin our spiritization, we must find a way to continue to integrate all of these spiritual realizations into our lives in order to allow them to become permanent. Distillation is the level of further purification. So if you take wine and you distill it, you can turn it into brandy. And again, this is the idea of removing those things that are diluting your essence and concentrating yourself into a purer version of who you really are. Again, you're throwing away all the things which dilute you, which make you less pure. In this case, the water. You evaporate the wine, and you distill the spirit out of that wine to make brandy. Again, this is the purification, that concentration, that removal of the things which dilute you. One example of distillation is finding ways to live from a daily place of inner peace, even in the most mundane circumstances, with enough repeated practice of constantly dying and being reborn in the present moment without entering again into the habits, identifications, and cycles of the mind. We experience a strong and profound inner transformation. In the East, this is what is mostly defined as a self-realization or enlightenment. Certain practices such as mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and self-inquiry are useful at this stage. And I love this one. This is one of my favorite ones, this distillation. You are in no obligation to be the same person you were a second ago. You're under no obligation. You can be whomever you wish to be in any given moment. The only thing which stops you from doing that is your bias. If you allow yourself to be reborn in every moment as a pure entity, free of previous bias, free of predispositions and assumptions, then you can be truly free in any given moment to make whatever decisions that you wish to about your life. And you have to let that person that you were a moment ago die. Got to let that drop away and cease to exist in order to empower yourself to move forward. Finally, come to this final reintegration, the coagulation. Coagulation. Similar to the blood's ability to form clots and stop bleeding, coagulation is the moment when we've broken open the head. In other words, we've become free from the mind and have allowed our soul or our consciousness or soul to connect with the materia prima, the spirit. Fundamental building block upon which all is based, the universal mind. The meeting point between two opposites, such as the spiritual self and raw matter, heaven and hell, and life and death, is the point where existence becomes self-aware. This is the moment when our lives are without duality, when matter becomes spirit, or spirit is manifested in the material form. So again, this is talking about the unity. If you live in that moment of raw awareness, of recognizing your thoughts as being something that is separate from yourself, something that you see happening. You are not your thoughts, because you can't see something that you're inside of. If you are the thought, then you couldn't see the thought. The thought has to be separate for you. If I wish to see this glass, it has to be something that's separate from me. If it was wedged firmly behind my eyes in my head, then I wouldn't be able to perceive it. If I was this glass, the only way I could see it would be to look at a mirror. Okay? And recognizing that those thoughts are not you, that they are something that you are choosing to witness, you are a narrative you are telling to yourself, and that allows you to live in that state of pureness, again, without all these previous things gunking up your works from your distillation, all the previous dispositions and biases clogging up and limiting your spirit, so to speak. We can be without that. And when we sit in that place of pure awareness, we are truly free to be whoever we want to be in any given moment. That does actually bring me now to the end of the presentation. Let's see if I can stop screen sharing without losing my audio. Are we still here? Yeah, there we are. Right, fantastic. I'll have to do some investigation into seeing exactly what the problems are with this. I will be getting this video edited up to remove some of those awful long silences where you have no audio. So if you have rejoined me after losing interest when I was sat there for 15 minutes talking to a camera with no sound, then please check up. Hopefully tomorrow I should have an edited version of that up on my YouTube channel. If you do want to check out my previous videos, you can subscribe to me on BitChute and brand YouTube. You can find me Fanfare for the Conscious. Again, search me on any one of those channels and you should find my content. BitChute and brand YouTube, I've not quite got myself up to date on. I shall be doing that over the next week or so, making sure everything on YouTube is uploaded over there on those alternative platforms as well. If you do want to speak to me in person and join me over on lawfulbank.com, we can discuss anything you like. I'm planning on setting up a community page over there where we will put all my videos and I will link them all specifically on the site. And that will give us also a forum whereby we can chat. I've been thinking about the idea of making a Discord or a subreddit or anything like that. Well, why would I do that when I've got lawfulbank.com? I can set up a group. I'll provide links to all my previous videos. So if anybody does want to discuss, clarify, or further convene on any of the information in the videos, you should be able to have direct links where you can join the Fanfare community. Finally, if you do wish to follow me on Facebook, you can find me at F4TC, Fanfare for the Conscious. Thank you very much for watching, if indeed you still are. If you did like this content, don't forget to subscribe, the thumbs up, notification bell set to all will always make sure you're kept up to date on my latest content when it drops. If you do want to join me and be part of our own lawful living being network, whereby we are ready to replace the corrupt governments of the world, then don't forget to join me over on lawfulbank.com. Take care of yourselves, guys. Don't forget to stay free, think free, and always act free. And as always, I'll see you next time.